Lecture 10. Photointerpretation Basics. Introduction. Remote sensing stands as the scientific discipline that deals with the acquisition, processing and interpretation of measures relating to physical phenomena affecting surfaces, in particular the Earth's surface, without coming into contact with them, through the study of interactions of electromagnetic radiation with the surfaces themselves, to arrive at an image of reality. This image will then be broken down into themes, that is, areas of similar behavioral characteristics. The process of recognizing the themes is based on information that can be extracted from the images themselves and connected to color or spectral characteristics, of shape, texture or others, of the objects represented in them. The final thematic map derives from a complex of procedures, partly automatic and partly with direct intervention by the application domain expert. It should be noted that, however, even the most complex and sophisticated classification algorithms need an intervention strategy that takes into account the geographical and thematic context of the environment described in the image of the observed territory. Remotely sensed images. 1. An image is the description of a phenomenon or process, usually by means of two-dimensional representation of data relating to the phenomenon or process being investigated. The world of images is very vast and includes a multiplicity of forms with which they can be presented. Some describe the visible and others the invisible, some are real and others abstract. Pictures of faces and landscapes, drawings of children, paintings of painters are images. Pure images are those that graphically represent mathematical functions, those of the galaxies obtained through radio telescopes, those of the Earth taken up by artificial satellites. As the pages of a book contain sequences of characters, elementary parts belonging to an alphabet, organized in a language according to grammatical and syntactic structures, the images can be considered as a set of elementary parts, with structured connections that are called forms, organized in the plane so as to form structures or sequences of shades of gray or brightness levels that make up the information grains. In general, in remote sensing, a monochromatic image is a two-dimensional function that associates the representation of an observed scene with a set of data relating to the interactions of electromagnetic radiation with the physical surfaces of the scene itself. In order to be able to read the images, it is necessary to know how they were generated, their characteristics and the processing techniques that could enable the necessary interpretative key for the qualitative and quantitative extraction of the information contained therein. Remotely sensed images. 2. In the case of optical electronic recording devices, this physical recording surface does not exist, but its function is performed through the coupling between the sensitive area of the detector and a recording system of the electrical signal that is obtained in exit. Such devices, which are capable of making images, can be considered as a black box system that operates on an input signal, radiant flux, to produce an output signal, number. It is completely characterized once its transfer function is known. The sensor sequentially explores the Earth's surface, acquiring, at regular intervals, the radiation from the objects placed in its field of observation. The cadence with which the sensor explores, tile by tile as in a mosaic, the terrestrial surface through the sampling process helps to define the spatial resolution of the same. In other words, during each of these elementary sampling operations, the system measures the amount of radiation, i.e. the number of photons, which, coming from a portion of the ground, affects its sensitive part on the basis of the instrumental specifications used. These values of radiance are converted inside the optical electronic device into numerical values, starting from which the numerical or digital image, card by card, or cell by cell is constructed, by means of an ordered recomposition of the elementary parts called pixels, picture element. Image matrix. 1. An image can be mathematically described as a function L equals f, x, y, lambda, t, of two spatial variables x and y which represent the geographic coordinates, and of two parameters lambda and t which represent the wavelength, or spectral interval, and the time, or time interval, in which the information is acquired. The L value assumed by the image function at a coordinate point, x, y, is called brightness or gray level. Whether the position variables x and y can take only a limited number of values within a certain range. 0x less than x, 0y less than y. D, and if the brightness values L can take only a finite number of levels in a certain range, 0L max, then there is a digital image, usually L max equals 255. Image matrix. 2. A digital or numeric image is therefore a two-dimensional function which is defined by sampling according to a regular grid model, geometric resolution, and the values it can assume belong to a defined range of positive integers, radiometric resolution. It is therefore a set of discrete elements organized by rows and columns, and that is a matrix. Each of these elements, called pixels, or beta cells, is associated with a positive integer that represents the average measured radiance, i.e. the Amount of radiation that, coming from a certain portion of the scene observed in a certain band of the electromagnetic spectrum, affects the detector, or more generally the average value of the measured quantity, on a small area or elementary resolution cell. The cell is therefore the elementary tile that composes digital images. Each cell is thus characterized by three different values, I, J, L, where I and J are the row and column indices respectively, which identify the position of the cell within the digital image, and L, which is a number, positive integer, related to the measured radiance value, following figure. The row index 1 represents the Y coordinate, while the column index J represents the X coordinate in the scene space. The origin of the digital image is conventionally placed at the top left, as for the matrices, and the y-coordinate has the opposite direction with respect to the vector representation systems, which use the Cartesian plane as a reference. Image matrix, 3. Concept and representation of digital image. The digital image produced by a scanning system on a portion of the territory is made up of a matrix of nxm cells, visible individually in the enlargement of the 5 by 5 window, and each cell corresponds to a DN index number. Notice how the origin is in the upper left. Image matrix, 4. The numerical values L associated with each pixel are not directly visible as they are numbers, but can be easily translated into gray levels or light intensity through a subsequent digital analog converter to be viewed on screen. In the Anglo-Saxon literature they are indicated with a whole series of terms such as pixel value, PV, brightness value, BV, gray level, GV, digital count, DC, or digital number, DN. In this text, the term index number or gray level and the notation DN, I, J, are generally used to indicate the pixel value in row I, column J and K-band. Being the element of representation, the concept of cell brings with it the concept of resolution, indeed of the different types of spatial, spectral, radiometric and temporal resolution, specific to the systems used in the acquisition. The spatial or geometric resolution accounts for the level of details that are recognizable on the ground. The radiometric resolution is linked to the number of levels with which the signal is quantized in the analog to digital conversion. The spectral resolution indicates the width and or the number of the spectral bands used, while the temporal resolution is the frequency with which the sensor passes over the same area. The different resolutions are all interconnected and in competition with each other and constitute the elements that characterize a given mission. Image matrix, 5. To fully characterize the performance of the acquisition system in terms of spatial resolution, it is necessary to refer to the concept of MTF, introduced in the previous chapters. However, since for most acquisition systems the size of the detector is one of the main factors that determine the spatial resolution, for simplicity the GLFOV, ground IFOV, is used to indicate the spatial resolution associated with the cells of an image. Where PL is the linear dimension of the detector, H is the sensor height and F the focal length of the optical system. In the case of TM to indicate the nominal size of the ground resolution cell associated with the cell. Image matrix, 6. Radiometric resolution is the other important element. It also derives from the analog-digital conversion process of the electrical signal obtained at the output of the detector, as well as from its sensitivity. The greater the number of discrete values used to represent the amplitude of this signal, the greater the ability to distinguish, radiometric resolution, between the different radiance values of the scene, which is instead a continuous type. In general, as far as digital data are concerned, a finite number Q of bits is used to binary measurements of continuous quantities. The L number of possible gray level intensity values or DN index numbers is given by the relationship _= and gray levels DN can take all integer values in the range O, 2Q, 1. The larger the Q, the better the digital data can approximate the original observations and the higher the so-called radiometric resolution of the sensor. Image matrix, 7. Often in remote sensing, the radiation collected by the recording system is broken down, through a system of prisms or diffraction grids, into its different spectral components, each of which hits a specific detector, allowing multiple measurements to be taken simultaneously in different spectra bands. This characteristic is linked to the concept of spectral resolution. There are therefore multiple images of the same scene observed, one for each spectral band. Their whole is called the multispectral image. The multispectral image is therefore a multidimensional numerical matrix, each of which describes the scene observed in the relevant spectral band. The generic element, i.e. the pixel, of coordinates, I, j, is no longer made up of a single radiometric measurement, dn, but can be considered as a vector of measurements of as many components as the spectral bands of the multispectral image. Data recording formats. 1. Digital images are organized in a series of files, each of which is made up of a succession of records. The real images constitute only a part, even if the main one, of the data that are acquired and distributed. They are normally accompanied by other information, in turn collected in other specific files, such as an initial file, volume directory file, describing the entire volume of data, followed by the actual data in which each image file, imagery file, is preceded by a header file, leader file, and followed by a tail file, trailer file, which contain additional information regarding, for example, the identification and the status of the sensors, the platform arrangement, ephemeris, etc. There are three main formats for recording image data depending on whether sorting by band, row, or pixel prevails. Data recording formats. 2. BSQ, band sequential. In this format the DNS of each band are arranged one after the other until all the cells of a band are completed. In the same file are therefore contained all the cells of a spectral band, and to each record of the file corresponds a scan line of the recording system, and to each band corresponds a file. The BSQ format allows a well-structured organization of data, even if the extraction of multispectral subimages is not easy. It is however the most common format in the distribution of satellite data. BIL, band interleaved by line. In this format the DNS are organized by line instead of by band. After the DNS of line 1 of band 1, the DNS of line 1 of band 2, followed by the other bands till to the completion of all the bands. The image data are all contained in a single file. The BIL format facilitates the extraction of multispectral subimages. BIP, band interleaved by pixel. In this format the DN, rather than having an alternation for lines, follow an alternation for cells, so that after the cell of the line 1 of the band 1, follows the cell 1 of the line 1 of the band 2, and so on. This format, which was the first adopted, is currently hardly used for satellite data anymore. In the following figure the three different formats are presented. Photointerpretation. 1. The following list shows and compares some of the main characteristics of the two types of interpretation processes, the specific qualitative based on human analysis and the typical quantitative one based on automatic machine processes. Photointerpretation, human analyst. Completely made by the expert. High-level decision process. Limited multispectral analysis. Limitation in the distinction of gray levels, 16, or color tones. Ease of use of space information, shape, size, texture. Works on a small scale compared to the cell dimensions. Low accuracy in calculating areas. Subjective, concrete, qualitative. Photointerpretation. 2. Automatic interpretation, computer. Limited interaction request. Low-level decision process. Possibility of real multispectral analysis. Ability to quantitatively analyze all possible levels of gray, 256, or colors. Limitation, at the moment, in techniques that use spatial information. Operates at the single cell level. Precise assessment of areas. Objective, abstract, quantitative. Photointerpretation. 3. The process of analysis and visual interpretation of the images is highly dependent on the ability of the human analyst to make generalizations, that is, to pass from the detail of the single observations to the abstract model. This generalization process is a complex analogical process. To be able to identify an object on an image, it is necessary to cope on a knowledge built up over time through the experience of analyzing many and various images. The characteristics of shape, size, color, texture and structure are automatically associated with a certain model. Some mental processes allow an abstraction of the key types of known objects so that this information can be applied to the recognition of new objects. For example, when flying over a certain area by plane, it is possible to recognize a series of landscape elements such as a lake, a mountain, based on the logical process of abstraction of the typical characteristics of the lake, of the mountain that human beings acquired during times. Reproducing these generalization processes that lead to recognition means entering the domain of artificial intelligence where a preliminary qualitative and quantitative processing phase of image data is necessary. Image interpretation keys. 1. In this process of interpretation, the expert is based on the analysis of some characteristic parameters of the image such as contrast, texture, shape, etc. Among these parameters, those that must be highlighted are chosen according to the particular problem to be solved and the particular field of application, such as territorial planning, the study of agricultural crops, forests, or geomorphology, and so on. It may be useful to briefly summarize here the key parameters that trigger the psychovisual mechanism of the photointerpreter in extracting information from the visual analysis of the image. Shape. The shape is simply given by the geometric outline, contour, of an object. It is the most common and most important element for identifying an object. Often the simple outline contains such a surprising amount of information about the nature and function of an object, so that, without any other additional information, the photointerpreter is able to recognize whether an object is artificial or natural. Image interpretation keys. 2. Dimension. The size is generally referred to the area of an object but can also indicate the simple linear size, such as the length of an airport runway. Although not consciously, as soon as looking at an image, the brain-eye system immediately assigns a scale. This occurs not in a quantitative sense, but simply on the basis of the size of known objects, a house, a lake, a nation, in proportion to the size of the other elements or of the whole image. Of particular interest is the relationship of size between different objects of the same kind, 2 lakes, 2 buildings, etc. Tone and color. The tone corresponds to the intensity level of a monochrome image or the combination of intensity levels for a multispectral, color, image. Color is a primary characteristic of most natural elements present on the Earth's surface, while it may be less decisive for artificial elements. For panchromatic images, the photointerpreter must develop the ability to refer the gray tones to possible colors or possible response intensities at different wavelengths, taking into account climatic, seasonal, and lighting conditions. This is an area where the potential of the computer is larger than the human expert and is the basis of the automatic classification techniques of multispectral images. Image interpretation keys. 3. Texture. The texture describes the presence of spatial variations of brightness within an element. It is that characteristic which determines the smooth or wrinkled appearance of a certain surface. For example, at certain wavelengths a forest and a water body have the same average intensity of gray levels, but the uniform texture of a water body and the varied texture of the crown of trees allow for easy identification. Model or structure. It can be defined as the spatial arrangement of the shapes of objects that have well-defined geometric characteristics and periodicity. Consider, for example, the regular arrangement of trees in a poplar grove compared to the apparently irregular arrangement of trees in a wood. For the various scale patterns there are for man-controlled environments, such as a field of corn, and in the same way for natural elements, such as a hydrographic network. Recognizing a model includes a large cultural contribution, and extracting information from a particular model requires some form of prior knowledge. And this certainly applies to the machine but also to man. Image interpretation keys. 4. Shadow. Shadows are usually considered a disturbing element for the interpreter since they make it difficult to observe objects, in particular in very dark conditions. However, the shadow of an object through the information of its profile can be decisive for its recognition. For example, for visual interpretation, the long shadows of a satellite image acquired in winter highlight the morphology of an area much better than a summer shot. Location. The location indicates both the geographical position of an object and the position of an element with respect to others. Some authors actually distinguish the two concepts and indicate the geographical position by location and by association the relative location of an object. The environment in which an object is inserted certainly helps to identify it. This is particularly true for natural elements and, for anthropic elements, those related to agriculture, meaning the environment as morphology, altitude, exposure, climate, etc.